The Family Killer, Edward Zakrzewski's Final Hours, Before Execution, Florida's Death Row Reckoning. On a quiet street in Mary Esther, Florida, in the spring of 1994, a young family vanished into silence. A husband, a wife, 2 children, gone in a single night of unimaginable brutality. Now, 31 years later, the man who confessed to killing them, Edward Zakrzewski II, is scheduled to die by lethal injection. But this case is far from over. Florida is executing more people than any other state in America. Why now? And why did a jury, not unanimous in their decision, still lead a man to the death chamber? This is the story of the family killer and Florida's unsettling race to execute. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. The murders. Edward Zakrzewski was a man many would have called average, a 29-year-old Air Force sergeant stationed in the Florida Panhandle. He had a wife, Sylvia, 34-year-old, and 2 young children, 7-year-old Edward Jr. and 5-year-old Anna. But inside the Zakrzewski home, things were fracturing. Furthermore, he had told a neighbor that if she left him, he would kill her before she left. Sylvia wanted a divorce. She planned to leave Edward and return with the kids to her native South Korea. Edward couldn't accept that. On June 13, 1994, Edward Zakrzewski failed to report for duty at Hurlburt Field, raising immediate concerns among his colleagues. This absence was unusual and prompted an investigation into his whereabouts. Deputies dispatched to the family residence made a horrifying discovery. The bodies of Sylvia Zakrzewski and her 2 children were found in the bathtub. The scene was one of extreme violence and profound tragedy. Sylvia Zakrzewski had been subjected to multiple forms of assault. She was strangled and then attacked with both a machete and a crowbar, indicating a prolonged and brutal assault. The 2 children, Edward Jr. and Anne, suffered equally horrific fates. They were hacked to death with the machete, a weapon specifically acquired by Zakrzewski. Then, he cleaned the scene. The injuries inflicted upon Edward Jr. were particularly severe, resulting in near decapitation. This detail underscores the extreme force and intent behind the attack. All 3 victims sustained extensive and grievous injuries. They were stabbed, slashed, and beaten, reflecting the ferocity of the assault. The medical examination revealed the full extent of the violence. Crucially, the children exhibited defensive wounds, indicating a desperate struggle for survival against their attacker. These injuries provided direct evidence of their attempts to ward off the assault. Evidence directly implicating Zakrzewski was found at the scene. Blood, later confirmed to be that of his victims, was present on his clothing, specifically his shirt and socks. The murder weapons were also recovered at the scene, providing tangible links to the perpetrator. The machete, the crowbar, and a rope were all found, consistent with the injuries sustained by the victims. Following the murders, Zakrzewski fled the scene. Where did he go? Hawaii. There, he lived under the radar for 4 months, until the guilt caught up with him. He walked into a police station and confessed. The trial and sentencing. The trial determined that the murders were planned and intentional. The night before, Edward Zakrzewski got drunk, supposedly to gain courage in the face of his unbridled plan. That fateful day, Edward Zakrzewski skipped work, bought the machete with which he committed the murders, and also took cash to flee after the murders. Later, he returned home and killed his family members one by one. First, he killed his wife, then his children. And not only did he kill them, he inflicted so many wounds that he ensured they would not survive. Not only that, he dragged the bodies into the bathroom, cleaned the scene, altered and tampered with the crime scene. Afterward, he left, fled without a trace, did not report the deaths, abandoned the scene, and tried to disappear. After hearing the charges against them, Edward Zakrzewski pleaded guilty in open court. There would be no long trial, no dramatic jury verdict. But when it came time to decide his punishment, the jury couldn't agree. Of the 12 jurors, 7 voted for death for Sylvia and Edward Jr., 6 voted for life in the case of 5-year-old Anna, while 6 wanted death. But the judge overruled them all and sentenced Zakrzewski to 3 death sentences. That decision? It would echo through Florida's death penalty system for the next 30 years. Fast forward to today. Florida law no longer allows non-unanimous jury recommendations for death. In fact, most states don't. But Zakrzewski was sentenced under the old law. And now, on July 31st, 2025, despite significant changes in law and ethics, Florida executes him anyway. Politics, death row, and death warrant. Governor Ron DeSantis, a man with national ambitions and a tough-on-crime reputation, signed Zakrzewski's death warrant on July 1st. It's his 9th execution of the year, more than any other governor in modern Florida history. If this pace continues, he'll end his term with 48 executions, a record number. Even religious leaders are asking, why now? Why this man? Mr. Zakrzewski's death sentences and impending execution stand in violation of the 8th Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. The U.S. Supreme Court is Zakrzewski's final hope. His lawyers argue that his execution violates modern standards of decency. But so far, their pleas have been rejected, even though he confessed, even though his jury wasn't unanimous, even though today's laws would not allow what happened in 1996. At precisely 6 p.m. on July 31st, 2025, Edward Zakrzewski is scheduled to walk into the death chamber at Florida State Prison. Edward Zakrzewski was pronounced dead at 6:12 p.m. following a 3-drug injection at Florida State Prison near Stark. After the U.S. Supreme Court restored the death penalty in 1976, Florida carried out a 1-year high of 8 executions in 2014, a total matched this year with a mid-July execution and now exceeded. I want to thank the good people of the Sunshine State for killing me in the most cold, calculated, clean, humane, efficient way possible. I have no complaint, Zakrzewski said in his final words once the curtain to the death chamber went up shortly after 6 p.m. He was lying on a gurney covered with a white sheet. Before the drugs began flowing, he also quoted from a poem as 14 witnesses looked on, plus media reporters and prison staff. Once the drugs were administered, Zakrzewski began breathing deeply, surrounded by 3 corrections department staff in dark suits. One of them shook Zakrzewski by the shoulders and shouted his name. There was no reaction, and then he was still. No members of the victim's family spoke with reporters afterward. It's a man being executed not just for his crimes, but for a broken system that refuses to look back. The families are gone. The house is long demolished. The jury's voices have faded. But tonight, as the needle slips beneath Edward Zakrzewski's skin, one question remains. Is justice something we do or something we become? What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, mystery, and the shadows in between.